electric cars. These government handouts are the centerpiece of the disastrous so-called Inflation Reduction Act. Just about everything that President Joe Biden claimed about the IRA is false. And, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy that you showed those signs, which point out the lawlessness of the Biden administration when it comes to the law. What the IRA really stands for, to me, is irresponsible, reckless, and alarming. So let's start with the cost. According to Goldman Sachs analysis, the electric car subsidies in the IRA will cost an estimated $393 billion. That analysis is 28 times more than what the Congressional Budget Office estimated. Our national debt is now $34 trillion, and thanks to the IRA, we're about to spend hundreds of billions of dollars that we don't have to subsidize electric cars that the great majority of Americans do not want. This is especially true in Wyoming, where electric cars simply cannot compete with conventional vehicles. The fact is, electric car subsidies go primarily to the state of California, where nearly 40% of all electric cars in America are being sold. So hardworking families in my home state of Wyoming and the chairman's home state of West Virginia and other states represented significantly by members of this committee really are getting stuck subsidizing wealthy people from California. The IRA is a shakedown. It's also becoming very clear that President Biden hasn't thought through the consequences of his so-called energy transition. His efforts to force-feed American electric cars is going to cause greater instability in our nation's electric system. There's a group we refer to as NERC. It's the North American Electric Reliability Corporation. It has warned of increased risks from the premature closure of coal and natural gas power plants. The Biden administration does not seem to care. The Biden administration is working to shut down even more of these power plants while promoting a huge new source of demand on the grid, which is, of course, electric cars. Just consider that fully charging a single electric car consumes the same amount of electricity needed to power an entire house during times of peak demand. Does the President have any clue that his math is not working? No one really believes that 2/3 of the new cars sold in America in 2032 are going to be electric. The Biden administration's fixation on these electric cars amounts to wishful thinking on his part. But despite generous subsidies, the demand for electric cars is stagnating. Car dealers are opting out of selling them and opting out of servicing them. Compared to owners of conventional cars, owners of electric cars are paying higher repair costs, higher insurance rates, and by the way, they are getting less resale value. And the headline today, Mr. Chairman, and I ask unanimous consent to put this in the record, is from Bloomberg. We talk about resale values. Hertz reports today they are going to sell 20,000 EVs in its shift back to gas-powered cars. So much for the Biden economy.
Without objection.
So the first paragraph of this, Hertz Global Holdings plans to sell a third of its U.S. electric vehicle fleet and reinvest in gas-powered cars, they say, due to weak demand and high repair costs for its battery-powered options. Well, the American public is seeing exactly the same thing, and they're getting hit with similar bills. The damage that the IRA will do to America's automotive sector is potentially catastrophic. First 9 months of 2023, Ford Motor Company alone lost $3.1 billion on electric cars. Losses like that can't go on for long. Perhaps worst of all, the IRA plays right into the hands of the Chinese and other foreign companies. You've heard the expression, follow the money. Well, if you want to follow the IRA money, the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, you're going to need a passport because the money is going all over the world. Mr. Chairman, as you have repeatedly pointed out, the Biden administration has allowed electric car subsidies to flow to foreign companies in countries that are hostile to American interests. Recently, the Chinese carmaker BYD topped Tesla as the world's largest electric car manufacturer. In Europe, that company outsold Tesla in the last quarter of 2023. BYD's goal is to be the biggest electric car manufacturer in Europe by the year 2030. The administration has said it welcomes Chinese companies as big players, the administration says, in renewable and electric car markets. This is a terrible mistake. The IRA will push us away from the fuels and technologies where America has the lead and push us toward the minerals and technologies that are currently controlled by China. We need to change course. President Biden wants to subsidize and regulate our way to greater energy security and lower emissions. He wants to force the nation to adopt a single technology that only works in certain zip codes. This is a recipe for failure. We need to return to the pro-America, all-of-the-above energy strategy. We also need a comparable all-of-the-above vehicle strategy, a strategy that includes more efficient internal combustion engines, hydrogen fuel cells, compressed natural gas, and hybrid vehicles. These are technologies that can increase consumer choice while also reducing emissions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. One high note. The bill prevented any Chinese cars from getting any credits in the United States. We did that.
Our enemies are getting the money.
Senator.
Americans are asking themselves now, 3 years into Joe Biden's presidency, am I better off now than I was 3 years ago? Resoundingly, the answer is no. People are worse off in terms of their economic and financial security. We're worse off in terms of border security. Worse off in terms of national security. And it's Joe Biden and the Democrats who have caused these problems. Right from the beginning, Joe Biden reversed successful policies that helped secure the border. And a result of those actions, we have now had 8.8 million illegal immigrants coming into this country. Cities are being overrun. People cannot keep up with what's happening in the communities. Mayors are protesting. Additionally, a short time after that, Biden and the Democrats passed a massive $1 trillion reckless spending bill. This triggered the worst inflation in 40 years, for which American people are still suffering the painful high prices every time they go to the grocery store. And then we all remember the deadly and disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. And as a result of that, Russia, China, Iran no longer fear us. The American people need a commander-in-chief who stands strong, not one who continues to back down. So for these reasons and so many others, the American people know they are worse off now than they were 3 years ago. Joe Biden and the Democrats have squandered the best economy in our lifetimes. They have surrendered our southern border to the cartels and the drug dealers and the terrorist suspects. And they have empowered our enemies to commit acts of ruthless violence. Under any criteria, Joe Biden and the Democrats have made our nation worse as a result of their leadership, and Republicans are committed to putting America back on track. Mr. Chairman, thanks for holding this meeting. Mr. Leonard King, last week I was in Djibouti. We have 140 members of the Wyoming Air National Guard there. They're right there at the tip of activities. It's a hot spot. What we see is happening, with attack on the ships that are training to the point where they can't get through the Suez Canal. They can't get insurance. They're going around Africa. It's adding about 12 days to the transit time. Concern adding to the costs significantly, the impact of foreign trade. All of these things as a result of the Houthis and what they're doing in that area, aiming at ships, some with drones, sometimes with missiles. It's only about 11 miles that I was there at the point, looking how close things were. So they're in a hot spot. The day I get back, the New York Times has this big expose about the fact that the administration has really fallen down on the job of trying to prevent the sale of Iranian oil to China. They reported 59 million barrels of oil on, they described them as shadowy tankers that left Iran, and all of these have ended up in China. And then the cash from all of this ended up in Iran, and they said at the lowest prices of oil it would be $2.8 billion, but likely much more as prices fluctuate. Secretary of Treasury came to Congress. She testified, this is before that report came out, that, oh, things are fine, that we're doing everything we can. American people don't believe it. The soldiers that are there risking their lives don't believe it. Because that's the money that's being used. There was 140 attacks by the Houthis, funded and by Iran, on American soldiers in the last 4 months. We know where the money's coming from. A lot of it's coming from the sale of oil that we should be blocking, or other funds that go from the United States. What can, I think the administration has failed completely. I think the president is just being outworked and outplayed and outmaneuvered by the Iranians. I think the world is seeing a diminished president who's just not up to the job. What are you doing from the standpoint of the State Department to prevent this ongoing effort to sell, for Iran to be able to continue to sell to China? I mean, they're working together, and Iran's also giving drones to Russia. You have North Korea being belligerent as well. It just seems that we are not where we want to be. As a State Department official, what's your response to all this?
Well, thank you, Senator. First of all, for visiting Djibouti. It's not necessarily everybody's first, thought of where to go, but we have important interests there. I've been there 3 times in this particular job, so I'm aware of the details about which you speak, and we do have a very important interdiction and inspection operation for Yemen ships that is based in Djibouti, called the UN Verification and Inspection Mission. But certainly agree with you that the Iranians are not supposed to be able to sell that kind of oil to China. I think there are very vigorous efforts to counter that with our partners and allies, and that kind of funding, I think, that you are speaking about is in violation of not only U.S. interests, but also numerous UN Security Council resolutions.
Yeah, well, and it does seem that it was the New York Times expose that actually brought it to the fore, because the administration seems to be unaware of all of this that was happening out there.
I think the administration, I'm not the Iran expert, Senator, but I think the administration is aware of it and would certainly look into these reports in more depth now that they've been...
If they're aware of it, then they tried to mislead Congress intentionally, because the Secretary of Treasury said we're doing absolutely everything possible, and then all of a sudden this gets showed to the world from a press coverage. So anything you want to add on this? Okay. Well, we can go on and on. The other thing that I saw in Djibouti, and I asked you to comment on this, and you saw as well, China is building a large base there. You can see it from the air coming in. You can see it from the ground. China's making significant investments in that area. Our base in Djibouti was an old French Foreign Legion base, which is why it's named after the commander of the base at the time. But China's making significant, communist China is making significant investments right in that area, where the Gulf of Aden comes down and then goes up into the Red Sea. And from a State Department standpoint, anything that you're noticing with that and we need to be concerned with?
Well, certainly, Senator, I think we are very conscious and aware of Chinese expansion in the Gulf region, which is by and large not in our interests. I think that's very much a part of the engagement that we have with the Chinese and also our partners in the region and in East Asia as well.
Okay. And then to Mr. Shapiro, last month, Qatar Energy decided to suspend all transits through the Red Sea. This led to the shipments being forced, as I talked about, around the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa, adding significant delays, about a day, probably 12 days added in Israel, much more fuel being expended to move the product around. Same time, Russia, Iran are both building up their LNG export capacity. Europe's energy supply be helped or hurt by President Biden's decision to reduce American LNG exports, actually putting a pause on that, given that the supplies from Qatar are now forced to go around Africa?
Senator, I'm certainly not an expert on energy markets or energy export policies, so I think I'll decline to answer the question.
Well, it's hurting. It's
Sorry?
hurting. I'll just tell you the answer. Yeah. It's hurting.
May I address your question about China, if that's all right?
Please.
Because China's been mentioned on a couple of occasions, and I think it's actually quite noteworthy. One of your colleagues mentioned that what's quite clear is that China is playing no role to help with this multilateral international effort to defend legitimate shipping in the international waterways. And it is one of those moments when I think it has become clear to many of our partners in the region, sometimes who when people ask questions, are they going to remain committed to the U.S., or they ask, will the U.S. remain committed to the region, or will they have alternative security partners? They do not have an alternative security partner in China. There is nobody other than the United States who will do what we are doing to defend freedom of navigation in this region. And so I actually think it's been a moment of clarity about U.S. influence in this region in this regard.
I don't know if either of you want this question, you comment. What is the administration's strategy to ensure Europe is not forced to turn to Iran and Russia for LNG now that the U.S. is not wanting to export it based on the president's new policy?
I think it's a bit beyond the Defense Department's area of focus.
Well, it's indefensible. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much.
Mr. President, I just returned from the Middle East. We have 140 members of our Wyoming Air National Guard, and they are currently serving our nation, and they are stationed in Djibouti. Wyoming is very proud of these brave men and women who are fighting for our freedoms. Visiting them was a reminder of what makes America strong. It's also a reminder of the challenges that we continue to face. There's a confluence of crises all around the world, from El Paso, Texas to Jerusalem, Israel. These terrible crises did not emerge overnight. They are the direct result of the weakness of the current President of the United States. President Biden has been weak in the defenses of our nation. It's obvious to me, it's obvious to people all around the country, it's obvious to people all around the world. Since he took office, he and the Democrats have taken a wrecking ball to so many different sources of our nation's strength. Hollowed out America's military power in favor of wokeness. It's impacted and undermined recruitment. Sold out American economic strength in favor of what? Well, big government at home and massive government spending. They traded away America's energy dominance. Why? Well, in favor of Green New Deal fantasies. And it does seem that Democrats apologize for American excellence at every turn. They've worked us and worked to make us more dependent upon our enemies. President Biden's latest energy, he would call it a move, I would call it a disaster, weakens our nation even further. The administration announced in January that it would freeze permits for liquefied natural gas exports. I view this decision as astonishingly foolish. Affordable, reliable energy is the foundation of a strong, affordable economy. America's energy revolution created many good-paying jobs all across the country and certainly in my home state of Wyoming. It made us as a nation, energy independent. Some would go so far as to say energy dominant. And it helped us build the world's largest LNG export industry. This also gave our European allies a secure energy source. This is the time of Russia's incursion into Ukraine. This is one of the best examples of how American economic strength makes the world safer. The Republicans want to make Europe less dependent on Russia for energy sources and more connected to the United States. That's not what I see happening with this administration. Both by word and action, Democrats and this president make America and our allies more dependent on our adversaries. Attacking American energy dominance is a pattern of this administration, started on day one. Remember, it was day one that after the president gave a speech right out here at the Capitol building about how he wanted to bring the nation together, he went down and took an axe to the Keystone XL pipeline, and he opened the floodgates at the same time to the crisis that we're having at our southern border. The president restricted offshore oil drilling, and he's placed a moratorium on new coal permits on federal lands. All of these things undermining American energy security. And now comes this blow where he is cutting American natural gas exports. He's denying American good jobs, lower prices, and empowering Russia and Iran. Joe Biden has failed fundamentally what should be the goal of any president, which is to make America stronger, safer, more secure. President Biden also has a long list of foreign policy failures. Nobody can forget the deadly and disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. Taliban terrorists, they seized $7 billion of weapons. So many of these Americans had left behind. 13 brave soldiers lost their lives, including one from Wyoming, Riley McCullum, Bondurant, Wyoming. The fall of Kabul was a deadly disaster. In January of 2022, the president made another damaging misstep. He suggested that a minor incursion by Russia into Ukraine would be met with minimal consequences. Weeks later, we saw Russian tanks head into Kyiv. Then there's the chaos in the Middle East. September of 2023, the president's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, made a bold pronouncement. He said the Middle East region is quieter today than it has been in 2 decades. 8 days later, Hamas attacked Israel. They killed more than 1,200 Israelis. They took hundreds more hostages, including American citizens. It was the deadliest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. Conflicts in the Middle East are devastating, destructive, and destabilizing. They threaten America's interests and America's allies. Yet President Biden works hard to accommodate our enemies. He is a fair-weathered friend to our great ally in the Middle East, to Israel. We see that in his maximum concessions policy toward Iran. Early on, Biden pushed to rejoin Obama's Iran nuclear deal. He was negotiating to lift all sanctions imposed by President Trump. The Biden administration's lack of sanction enforcement and use of sanction waivers simply funded the Iranian regime. Iran used this flood of cash to bankroll Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and other terrorist proxies. In turn, the terror proxies attacked America, attacked our allies, and the attacks have only increased since October 7th. Iranian proxies have attacked American service members in the Middle East at least 180 times in the past 4 months. Let me say that again, 180 attacks on American service members in the last 4 months. We've lost 5 American troops because of these attacks. As the Commander-in-Chief, President Biden bears full responsibility for the continuity of the crisis that he has created. No surprise that Americans overwhelmingly believe our country is heading in the wrong direction. America needs to change course, and Republicans are the party of American strength. We believe in peace through strength, not dependence on our enemies. Americans deserve a president that's strong and a nation that is safe and a nation that is secure. That is our commitment. So I'll tell you, Mr. President, the day I came back from Djibouti, it was very distressing to see the report in the New York Times. They reported that America and this administration has failed to do what it said it would do in terms of Iran selling oil to China. Failed. If it hadn't been for the New York Times reporting, the American people wouldn't know because the administration would never tell them that tanker after tanker have moved 59 million barrels of oil from Iran to China. Every one of those tankers ended up in China, and the cash, worth a minimum $2.8 billion, ended up back in Iran. That's the money that Iran is using to fund these 140 attacks on American service members in the last 4 months. We know where the money is coming from, and yet Democrats look the other way. The Secretary of Treasury, hapless as she is, came to Congress and testified inaccurately, possibly misleadingly, that the administration is doing everything that they can. Well, they are not. This administration is looking the other way as a hapless and diminished President Biden continues to be outplayed by Iran. And this is evident to the world. And as Joe Biden bungles along, Russia, Iran, North Korea, Communist China continue on the march. We need a strong president to keep us strong and safe and secure. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. Joe Biden and the Democrats have squandered American strength. And as a result, they have surrendered the peace, and it's evident all around the world. I've just gotten back from the Middle East, where I was with the Wyoming Air National Guard, 140 members who were stationed in Djibouti. These Wyoming soldiers are in a hot spot, and they are face-to-face with Iran, and Iran's goal is terrorism and death to America. Iran-funded Houthis are attacking our ships in the area with missiles as well as drones. And Joe Biden is asleep at the switch. The day I got back, we got even more disturbing news about how asleep Joe Biden and the Democrats have been. And that's with a report that this country is not doing what it needs to do to stop the flow and the sale of oil from Iran to China. Shadowy tanker ships have moved 59 million barrels of oil, worth $2.8 billion. The oil ships, the tankers, have all ended up in China, and the cash has ended up in Iran. This is the money that Iran has used 140 times to attack American soldiers in just the last 4 months. And then the President's hapless Secretary of Treasury came to Congress and testified falsely, inadequately, incorrectly, that they're doing all that they can to stop this flow of oil. The Democrats and Joe Biden are looking the other way as Iran continues to outplay our diminished president. American weakness is on display all around the world. Joe Biden bumbles, and what we see is Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea on the move. The American people deserve a strong president and a nation that is strong and safe and secure. As I predicted at this podium last week, Joe Biden would use the State of the Union to blame everyone else for his failures. He takes zero responsibility for the disaster that is our southern border. All the amounts of his yelling will not reverse the flow of the 9 million illegal immigrants who've come into this country while he has been president. And no blaming will bring back innocent victims like Laken Riley, who was brutally murdered. And then this unapologetic president apologizes for calling her murderer an illegal immigrant. That's exactly what he is. And then the president tries to mislead the American people into saying, oh, we just need new laws. The president needs to stop abusing the law, which he is doing with mass parole for millions. At the beginning of his term, Joe Biden threw open the southern border to people from all around the world. He stopped construction of the wall, started a program called Catch and Release, releasing into the United States. He's made our country a haven for criminals, drug dealers, people who are on the terrorist watch list. And this past weekend, the president's interview said he's going to continue to do more of the same. He has no intention of stopping, none whatsoever. What he actually said is what we just need to do is have more orderly flow. Mr. President, 2 out of 3 Americans say you are dead wrong on that. They want a secure border. And Republicans have plans to secure the border. We know what to do. It's stop this catch and release. It's finish the wall. It's bring back a policy that worked called Remain in Mexico. The American people deserve a president who is honest with them. That's not what they got from Joe Biden during his State of the Union. Well, Joe Biden is doing everything he can to attack American energy, and we're certainly feeling it in Wyoming, just as the previous senator spoken about, and the lead member of this press conference has spoken about with regard to Alaska. The previous speaker mentioned President Biden's actions as crazy, stupid, and delusional. As an orthopedic surgeon, I would say they were boneheaded decisions by this administration. Look, to say that you cannot, they're going to prohibit oil production in, of all places, the National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska. That's like saying no more picnics in Yellowstone National Park. You know, they've tapped the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, took up almost half of it out of there. We're now at the lowest level in 40 years, and you can't replace it, you can't go after into the National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska. This is a gift to Russia, to Iran, to Venezuela, and to the OPEC cartel, and it is wrong. And tomorrow we're expecting the president to once again reject the Ambler Road project. He's going to mandate electric vehicles, but he's saying you're not going to get the minerals that you need, the key minerals here in the United States to build those vehicles. Oh, so where are we going to go? Who has control right now? China. This is a second boneheaded decision. So they block minerals, they block energy. Oh, and the EPA, what have they been advised? Prioritize climate, the religion of climate, over energy that's affordable, available, or reliable all across the board. We need American energy. We need more American minerals, not less. The administration has it completely wrong. And then today they've made a third boneheaded decision, and it has to do with the BLM. And in Wyoming, BLM stands for the Bureau of Land Management. This is an area that controls public lands, and half of the state of Wyoming is controlled by public lands, and 70% of the minerals under the land in Wyoming is controlled by owned by the federal government. So what the federal law is doing is managing public lands not the way they're supposed to use it, which is for multiple use. We use it for agriculture, we use it for energy, we use it in Wyoming for recreation, for hunting, fishing, for grazing, all of those things. Now the federal government has decided that they are going to, for political activists, lease the public land so that then activists can lease the land and then take it into non-use. They are now describing non-use as a use for public lands. Absolutely foolish. Look, this rule is a stake aimed right at the heart of Wyoming people, Wyoming workers, the Wyoming jobs, the Wyoming minerals, Wyoming energy, all of those things. And Senator Hoeven and I have introduced a Congressional Review Act to overturn this dangerous and outrageous decision, and we're going to continue to fight Biden's administration, which is anti-American and anti-American energy. Thank you. Well, Joe Biden has now had his 200th act of attacking American energy and American energy workers. Time and time again, this president has declared war and is conducting a war against American energy producers, is making it more expensive and harder to produce energy at home in America. And the American people are paying the painful price of this climate obsession. They pay every time they go to fill up with gas. They pay every time they pay their electric bill, and they feel the pain even at the grocery store. So this energy insanity began on Joe Biden's first day in the White House when he killed the Keystone XL pipeline. But it continues even to today, as he said of the National Petroleum Reserve that it can't be used for petroleum. That's the purpose it's there. This president has now for 3 years continued to prioritize his climate agenda over the needs of the American people. And he refuses to understand that we can protect the environment without punishing the economy. Every one of these 200 actions has hurt our economy, but it's helped Iran, Russia, and China. Reliable, affordable energy is the key to a healthy, growing economy. In my home state of Wyoming, we are the energy breadbasket of the country. This administration is lawlessly blocking our use of government lands to produce American energy. This administration is focusing so hard on killing the production of American energy that they're choking off the lifeblood of our communities. These are great jobs. The tax dollars that come in as a result of these energy jobs, they help pay nurses to keep our hospitals open. They pay teachers to keep our public schools open. The climate zealots don't seem to care at all about any of those things. Republicans know what we need to do. We need to cut all this red tape coming out of Washington and unleash American energy. Senator Shaheen, had you just come in? If you'd like to go first, that's fine.
Senator.
Okay, thanks. I'd like to talk about the World Health Organization, if we could. The Biden administration has vowed to reform the World Health Organization, but it threw away its leverage early on, in my opinion. The administration, against the advice of many, rejoined the World Health Organization, gave it $200 million without insisting on a single reform. In a few weeks, the administration is expected to commit the United States to 2 international agreements that would expand the World Health Organization's authority during a global pandemic. Last week, I joined my Republican colleagues in calling on President Biden to reject these agreements, what I believe are harmful. Yesterday, the UK announced that they will refuse to sign the World Health Organization's pandemic accord, saying that they will only support the adoption if it is firmly in the UK national interest and respects national sovereignty. December 13th last year, during a hearing held by the Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic, you said, quote, "This administration is firmly committed to ensuring that the World Health Organization implements a comprehensive set of organizational reforms, particularly to strengthen its governance, its budgetary and financial management processes, and to improve oversight to strengthen the organization's efficiency and effectiveness." You know, instead of focusing on reforming the World Health Organization, the administration is choosing to hand over U.S. sovereignty to them. We are the United States, not the United Nations. So the question is, do you commit to ensuring that U.S. sovereignty is not infringed upon?
Senator, let me respond in the affirmative. Absolutely, the sovereignty and security of the United States will not be undermined in this negotiation process. We have been very insistent that there are 2 articles in the pandemic accord discussions that I would like to just reiterate. Article 3 states clearly that WHO has no authority over sovereign states. Absolutely not. Article 24 of that same negotiation further expands, and it states clearly that neither the Secretariat of WHO nor the Director General has any authority over any sovereign state in the areas of dictating, telling them what to do in terms of mandate use of any tools, including vaccines, masks, lockdown, etc. I think it's absolutely very clear in Article 24. We will oppose any attempt or any perception of that accord that seeks to undermine or is perceived as going to undermine the sovereignty of the United States. I will just end, Senator, by saying that the sole purpose for us in the discussion is to protect our national interests, And there are 3 things that we are seeking to achieve in this negotiation. One is to ensure that we have capacity globally that can allow us to easily detect, prevent, and control and respond to disease outbreaks. As we know, a disease outbreak anywhere in the world becomes a threat right here. 1 million Americans died because of COVID-19. Secondly, is to ensure that we have access in a timely fashion to biologic materials, including specimens, data that will allow us to develop vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics that will protect us. And lastly, the ability to distribute those resources in an equitable manner.
So following the UK's announcement just yesterday about their refusal to sign, is the UK alone able to block the passage of the accords? Or if not, how many other member countries would need to oppose it in order for the accords to fail?
The accord, Senator, is still being discussed, including as of this morning, about several issues, especially areas related to intellectual property, technology transfer, pathogen access and sharing, as I indicated. This accord has been going on, the discussions, for about 2 years. So we remain hopeful that countries that are discussing will see value in our collective security and learn the lessons, as Chairman said, of what COVID taught us about our common vulnerability. So we just don't know exactly who is going to oppose it or not, but we have to show our leadership. As I said in my introduction, this is the moment for us to show the leadership. We have been a global health leader over the years, and this is not a moment for us to relent our leadership.
Mr. Chairman, can I have one quick last question, and it's to Ms. Kelly Adams Smith. Moldova's recent, almost exclusively reliant on Russian energy. Tuesday, Norway and Moldova signed an agreement to tighten cooperation in their energy sector. Can you tell me the current status of the Moldova's energy grid?
Thank you very much for the question, Senator. It is true that Moldova was 100% dependent on Russia for its energy sources. After the Russian reinvasion of Ukraine, it became clear that that was no longer possible. And the Moldovan government, with assistance from the United States and European allies, has made some successes in becoming less dependent. The energy grid, the electricity grid of Moldova is now hooked up to the European grid. USAID is funding an electrical line between Romania and Moldova, and Moldova is now also buying for the first time non-Russian gas, which is an incredibly positive development.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
And if we need to be in a skiff, we'll have those
Yes.
conversations in a skiff. Senator Barrasso.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Let me just say I agree with Senator Murphy and the comments that he just made. I think we ought to get answers to these questions. These are legitimate questions to be answered, and the administration ought to answer the questions. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to Senator Murphy as well. I wanted to talk about cutting off arms to Israel. Israel is one of our nation's closest allies. On October 7th, Hamas brutally murdered men, women, and children in Israel. I've seen the videos. American citizens were among the individuals killed, injured, kidnapped, still held hostage. The death and destruction of these terrorists is shocking. Hamas continues to hide in populated areas. Hamas continues to use civilians as human shields. With the serious threats in the region, I think it's more important than ever for Israel to quickly receive everything it needs to defend itself, to eliminate Hamas. Yet the Biden administration is doing the complete opposite at this point. Last week, President Biden announced he was cutting off shipments of ammunition and weapons to Israel. I want to be clear, this is happening while one of our strongest allies in the Middle East is at war with terrorists, murderers. The people of Israel deserve a partner and a friend that it can trust, not one that leaves in the face of terrorism and terrorists alone. The administration should be ashamed, I believe, of its actions. These are the weapons Israel needs to defeat Hamas, to defend its people against additional attacks from Iran and from its proxies. Last week, 48 U.S. senators introduced a resolution condemning the decision by the Biden administration. We must be taking every step possible to expedite the delivery of these important weapons.
Senator will suspend.
Innocent children, mothers, families, genocide.
Senator Barrasso.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I was saying, the people of Israel deserve a partner and a friend that it can trust, not one that leaves it to face terrorists alone. I think that the administration should be ashamed of its actions, and there are weapons Israel needs to defeat Hamas and defend its people against additional attacks from Iran and its proxies. So last week, 48 U.S. senators introduced a resolution condemning the decision by the Biden administration. I think we must be taking every step possible to expedite the delivery of these important weapons, not putting up new barriers and obstacles in the way. So do you support the U.S. blocking weapons from going to Israel?
Thank you, Senator, for your question. Just want to say from the very beginning that our support to Israel is ironclad. And this administration has shown its strong support in very many ways, including President Biden being the first president to be in Israel during a wartime situation, all the support that we have provided to Israel at the UN, thanks to the the bipartisan support for the appropriations that we were able to, and you were able to provide for us to continue to give weapons to Israel. And of course, we are very concerned about the loss of life by Hamas and what they've done in Israel, but also by the loss of life by the Palestinians who are also caught up in this war. And as you may know, there have been conversations that President Biden has had with Israel about the situation in Rafah and the concern that we have just about the particular bombs that were going to go there, the 2,000-pound bombs that we had already notified, and we had informed Israel that going into Rafah could result in us not providing some weapons to them. Today, as you probably know, we have put in review $1 billion worth of equipment to go to Israel. That was a pause. We are still considering the situation there, and we continue to work with Israel and have conversations with them on these issues on a regular basis. But I just want to highlight that we will continue to provide Israel with all of the funding that you have provided us in the supplemental. As I noted, we have provided them today with tiered with the $1 billion.
And my concerns are that there are other countries looking in on this as well. And if they say, well, how can we expect us to be good partners with them if at this time we're withholding weapons? So the question is, given recent reports of the administration asking for approval from Congress for a new arms shipment, why is the administration holding up weapons now? This is something that was just approved.
As I said, thank you again. As I said, that these are specific weapons that we have concerns about. The loss of civilians that could be used if these bombs are used. But as I said, we are continuing to provide Israel with arms. We will make sure they get all the arms that you've been appropriating to us, and we will continue to.
One more question, but my follow-up to that would be that some of these bombs are to get to the fact that these tunnels are so far underground, and that's used as a hiding place by the Hamas, and we've seen that, and I think there's been a surprise to many that how the extent of the tunnels and the depth of the tunnels, and that the attention of some of these armaments are to get to specifically to that. But I just wanted to ask a quick question on China. So during your confirmation process, you committed to me in writing that you would work with U.S. allies and partners to urge Beijing to engage meaningfully with the United States on arms control. The 2022 Nuclear Posture Review said China has embarked on an ambitious expansion, modernization, diversification of its nuclear forces, of which you're well aware. Went on to say that by China expanding its nuclear options, it could allow for them to include nuclear coercion, limited nuclear first use in their employment strategy. Can you share with the committee how many engagements you actually have had with the Chinese officials specifically on their nuclear weapons ambitions and expansion?
Thanks for your question. I can go back and think about the exact times. We had the official engagement in November. I've met with individuals several times on the margins of other meetings that I've been to, same with other colleagues in my bureaus. So we've had conversations. What we're looking for is a sustained dialogue that we can count on a regular basis. That's what we're really looking for.
It sounds like we're not having that at this point.
Excuse me?
It sounds like that's not going on at this point. Based on their decisions, probably not
right,
your
it's
decision.
not happening at this point, but we need to keep trying to make it happen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you. Madam President, I come to the floor today to speak about the economy. Joe Biden is clearly the president of high prices. People all across the country, all 50 states, well aware that this is going to be Joe Biden's enduring legacy. Prices spiked again in April. The statistics are out. Prices have been rising again and again and again. Price increases have been now above 3% for the last 37 months. This is the longest period in history of high prices since the late 1980s. President Biden continues to repeat a falsehood. You could call it a lie, because he has said time and again that inflation was 9% when he came into office. This is pure confusion on his part. Even the liberal fact checkers, people at CNN, people in the Washington Post have said what President Biden is saying about inflation is flat out false. It's wrong. In January of 2021, the day that the current President Biden took the oath of office, the inflation rate in America was 1.4%. Today, prices are almost 20% higher than they were the day he took the oath of office. The burden of Bidenomics on the American public is crushing, it's compounding, and of course it's cumulative. It continues to add on every single day. But Democrats in this chamber and around the country deny this economic reality. Certainly the Democrat in the White House denies this economic reality. And President Biden proved that he was completely disconnected from the suffering American families. Earlier this month, he said Americans have, quote, the money to spend. I'm not sure who he's talking to, but that's not the case across America, and it's not the case in my home state of Wyoming. Democrats are completely out of touch on the economy because they are out of touch with American voters, the citizens of this country. Rising prices have plagued Americans for the last 3 years. Everyday life costs more and more and more. Under Joe Biden, Americans are squeezed, they are stressed, and they are struggling to get by. More than half of Americans will tell you that the economic conditions that they see day in and day out are poor for them personally. More than 80% of Americans saying that high prices are their number one concern. That's what Americans are suffering from today. President Biden's policies are not the cure for inflation and our economic anxieties. Joe Biden and the Democrats' policies are the cause of our economic struggles. Joe Biden and the Democrats in this chamber and in the House of Representatives at a time when Nancy Pelosi was Speaker, they approved more than $3 trillion in wasteful Washington spending. The President added more than $1 trillion additionally on stifling and punishing economic regulations. He launched a war on American energy, hiked energy costs for families. Gas prices went up, electricity prices went up. Because of failed Bidenomics, Americans are paying over $12,000 more a year this year than they did the year that he came into office, just to buy the same things that they could buy the day he came into the White House. It's over $1,000 a month. That's what the American people are seeing today, Madam President. A $100 cart of groceries in 2019, the cost now of that same cart full of groceries, not very full, $137. Gallon of gas was in 2021, $2.38. Today, in many of the battleground states, Nevada, Arizona, Pennsylvania, it's approaching $4 a gallon. Now, of course, high prices aren't the only problem. Interest rates are at the highest level in 23 years. High interest rates are a bitter fruit of Bidenomics. People are suffering when they have to take out a loan. This is causing significant affordability crisis all across the country and in all age groups. Under these failed policies of the Biden administration, younger people, younger Americans have been demoralized. They are delaying life's biggest moments. Homeownership is slipping far clearly out of the reach of most young married couples and young people trying to start a family. Young Americans are facing the costliest housing market ever. Borrowing costs have soared. Biden took office, they were 2.7%. Today, over 7%. Home prices today are nearly 6 times higher than the average household income. That's a record ratio, 6 times higher than the average household income. Other costs, utility costs, insurance costs, all costs are climbing, and they're all caused by the amount of spending we've had under this administration. Younger Americans are having trouble buying a car. The price of car loans has gone way up, as well as the price of automobiles themselves. Younger Americans are also forced to rely on credit cards more and more. They are developing mounting debt, which is going to continue to saddle them in their future. Look, young Americans will tell you that they are overextended and they are distressed and they're begging for relief. Today's high prices and high interest rates are going to create tomorrow's troubles. Now, President Biden has failed to protect the American dream. We now have an entire generation of young Americans who can't afford to buy a home, can't afford to start a business, can't afford to begin a family, and certainly can't afford to grow any savings that they may have. Americans are absolutely fed up with big spending, high-priced Democrats. People are financially exhausted by Joe Biden's high prices. People are ready to move beyond Bidenomics and beyond Joe Biden. Time for a change. Senate Republicans are ready to put America back on track. We're fighting to lower costs. That's what we're hearing every weekend at home. Get down the prices of things that are up under Joe Biden. Stop the wasteful Washington spending. And please unleash American energy. That's the solution to the problems facing America today. This is how we can help make life more affordable for all Americans. Thank you, Madam President, and I yield the floor.
Terrorists have arrived in America. The FBI says that lights are blinking red, warning lights. National security experts say that there is an increased risk of a coordinated attack. Why? Because the Democrats are the party of open borders. Just last week, 8 illegal immigrants were arrested with ties to the radical, extreme, violent terrorist group ISIS. They were arrested in California, Pennsylvania, and New York. They came from Central Asia to Mexico, and from there easily came to the United States. Why? Because this open border policy of the Democrats has something called catch and release. Democrats, let me tell you, it is not working. You are releasing into the United States criminals, drug dealers, murderers, and now terrorists. And for other Americans, let me tell you, we are living on borrowed time. This Biden administration and the Democrats have let 10 million illegal immigrants into our country. 10 million. Common sense will tell you that among them are additional terrorists, and Democrats have no plan to keep us safe. Last week, Joe Biden had an executive order, a feeble executive order, too little, too late. And today at the White House, Joe Biden is going to be down there with another order, which is going to provide amnesty for another 500,000 illegal immigrants. Our country is being invaded by illegal immigrants, and in this Senate, Democrats are repeatedly voting to continue this. The American people want secure borders. We want to know who's coming here. Republicans have solutions. It's finish the wall. It's stop, catch, and release, and bring back a policy that works. And that policy is called Remain in Mexico.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Page, I mean, all they've just said, look, it's made a lot worse by the inflation that this country's lived with under Joe Biden. The last 3.5 years, prices are up 20% across the board. You know, grocery stores, everything is up. Prices are up, and that's impacting families trying to get their kids fed, get the kids to school, and child care. So, you know, when you take a look at what's happened with inflation in the last 3.5 years, people have been saddled with a lot of pain, a lot of problems affecting their life because of the costs. So, to me, inflation makes everything cost more. Americans are being forced to make tough decisions, and part of that involves child care. Child care costs continue to rise. I understand why parents are struggling to make ends meet. In almost every state, child care is surpassing the average rent and mortgage payments. In Wyoming, the average household spends 10 to 14% of their income on child care. Parents are being forced to choose between their jobs and taking care of their kids. So how is the current state of the economy and these increase in prices that's impacted people all across the country, how that's impacting the cost of child care, as well as workforce participation rates, specifically in rural areas?
Yeah, I think it's certainly impacting the childcare workforce. We have not yet recovered from the COVID-19 pandemic. Iowa is not immune to that, and nationwide, the childcare workforce has not come back to pre-pandemic levels. I do think that particularly in our rural communities, that continues to be a struggle because there is a lack of childcare access. These are facts. What we're doing in Iowa is really trying to focus on our reimbursement rates going to the current market rate survey. The Child Care and Development Block Grant does also require us to do that every 3 years so that we know that our rates are at least a percentile of the current market. We also do narrow cost analysis. Several states are starting to do alternative methodologies as well to try to understand the true cost of care as it relates to our subsidy reimbursements. There are two things that are going to be happening over the next few years after the 2024 final rule for the Child Care and Development Block Grant, which is paying providers prospectively as well based on enrollment, not attendance. And those are a couple of other things that, from a long-term outlook, are ways that the industry will be stabilized.
We think of child care deserts, and you do in Iowa as well. We do in Wyoming, areas where child care providers are places where maybe 3 kids vying for a single open child care slot. Nationwide, I think about half Americans live in an area that you could define this way. Without child care, parents have to make rough decisions, tough decisions for them, leave this, move someplace else, or unable to participate in the workforce. Are there strategies that you've seen which have been effective in reducing the prevalence of these child care deserts?
Yeah, Iowa is about 23% considered a child care desert. One of the things that we're really trying to focus on is understanding our true capacity and the ages of children. Just saying census data is not enough to understand what a desert means, because we have those families that work non-traditional hours. We have families that want a faith-based program and can't access it, or they want a family child care home versus a licensed child care center. So it's really about, when we think of that parent choice, what can they actually access? So numbers don't always tell that child care desert story. That's not to say that it's not true that there is a lack of access in certain communities. And so we really do want to be looking at the data and then focusing on those areas for grants and contracts funding the unmet needs.
Okay, and you talked about faith-based program, other things that are out there. My question to you, Dr. Stevens, is it's clear that child care is important. It's expensive. A recent study found 40% of the U.S. workforce and parents and 10% of parents of young children. Congress has been working to find solutions to make it easier for families to care for their loved ones, young and old. Given the diversity of needs, of interests, and locations, it's clear that a federal one-size-fits-all program doesn't work for everybody. And what this page just talked about. Could you explain some of the common problems that may arise with these one-size-fits-all models?
As I've been emphasizing, there's nothing that parents care more about than the well-being of their young children. We have to do everything we possibly can to empower them to be making the decisions that they feel good about for their young children. And that's unlike that large federal programs just don't work that way. As I've also said, states play the primary role in children's education, which really means development. They need to be playing a bigger role in this. There are states that are, both Virginia and Minnesota, for example, have been taking huge steps in sort of taking this on. The way markets work is this is a market that works for wealthy people. There's a wonderful economist named Art Rolnick who pioneered something called the Minnesota Early Learning Scholarships in Minnesota. And what he says is, what economists know is demand drives supply, not the other way around. Their program was successful because they gave what they described as scholarships to very low-income families. And what happened was the supply of high-quality care arose in neighborhoods where it hadn't been there before. If that answers your question.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank my colleague, and I think our final speaker may be Senator Casey, a very appropriate.
On the 4th of July, Joe Biden said I had a bad debate. He went on to say that 90 minutes on a stage would not erase the last 3.5 years. Well, he's right. Nothing can erase the damage that the Democrats have done to the American people over the last 3.5 years. They're the party of open borders, and they're the party of high prices. With regards to prices, they have saddled the American people with record inflation. It has been painful. It's been punishing. Prices are up cumulatively 20% since they took over in January of 2021. In terms of immigration, they have invited, they have incentivized 10 million illegal immigrants to come to this country. They've paved the way for criminal cartels, for drug dealers, for people on the terrorist watch list to come here, to rob and to rape and to murder Americans. That is their record. And that's why in record numbers, Americans are saying the country is headed in the wrong direction. And Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and every one of the Democrats, those that are going to be up here speaking soon, they are all responsible for the damage that has been done. The American people want strong leadership. We're not going to get it from the Democrats. We cannot trust the Democrats to keep us safe or make us more prosperous. It is their policies that have caused the pain. To get this country back on track, we have to stop this reckless Washington spending. We have to secure the border. We have to unleash American energy. That's what Republicans are committed to do.
The senator from Wyoming.
Madam President, first I ask unanimous consent that the following senators be allowed to speak for up to 5 minutes each prior to the scheduled roll call vote, and it's Senator Hoeven and Senator Moran and Senator Cornyn following me.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I rise today to speak about the need for strong American leadership. President Biden's weakness, seen on the world stage, is dangerous. It's dangerous for our nation, and it's dangerous for the world. It hurts our citizens, and it encourages aggression against our nation and others. Sadly, America doesn't have strong leadership right now from the president or the vice president. Joe Biden is stumbling, he's bumbling, he's blundering into a disaster. It's not one night of forgetfulness on the debate stage. It's 3.5 years of a pattern of failures. We are living in the time of heartbreak at home and humiliation abroad. Look at the drugs, the death, the destruction coming from our southern border. Under Democrat open border policies, there have been 10 million illegal immigrants who have invaded our nation. Americans all across the country are in danger. Democrats' open borders allowed Venezuelan criminals to go to Houston, Texas, to sexually abuse and murder a 12-year-old girl. Illegal immigrants' crime have taken the lives of many Americans across the country. They make headlines every day. The open border allows deadly fentanyl to flood our nation and poison our communities in all of our states, and certainly Wyoming has been one of the victims of this poisoning. More than 300 terrorist suspects have come into America. That is 300% higher than what we saw under the strong policies of President Trump. And terrorists are roaming our nation undetected. Remember, border security isn't optional. It's an obligation, a commitment to the safety of our American people. It is the foundation of our safety. Without border security, there can be no national security. Under Joe Biden, Americans are not safe at home, and increasingly, the world is not safe either. President Biden's weakness has invited war, it's invited conflict, and it's invited chaos around the world. He continues to appease Iran by letting Iran avoid sanctions. Iran's exporting almost 1.3 million barrels of oil to China each and every day. It uses the money from these oil sales to fund terrorism around the world. President Biden made the misguided assumption that concessions to Iran would stop conflict. Instead, Biden's appeasement makes Iran more aggressive. Meanwhile, Biden has proven to be a fair-weathered friend to our strong ally, Israel. On American college campuses today, student protesters express hostility to the very existence of the Jewish state. Democrats in Washington have also grown more hostile to Israel. Senator Schumer stood on the floor. He demanded on this floor in March that Israel replace its prime minister. Senator Sanders called the very next month for America to stop sending aid to Israel. The anti-Israel drift in the Democrat Party is bad enough. What's more worrying is that President Biden, the leader of the free world, lacks the backbone to stand up against it. Rather than resist the pro-Hamas wing of his party, Biden has repeatedly bowed to them. He recently slapped a de facto arms embargo on Israel. The weapons he withheld would limit civilian casualties and help Israel free the hostages. Biden stopped that. That includes 8 American hostages who spent the last 9 months, including their 4th of July, in captivity by Hamas. President Biden blocked these war-winning weapons anyway. He would rather appease a small group of pro-Hamas voters in Michigan than support our closest ally in the Middle East. Playing politics is the core of Joe Biden's foreign policy. He recently claimed that no American service members died on his watch. He told the world that. Well, that's false. It's wrong. It's a denial of what's happened. On January 11th of 2024, 2 Navy SEALs were lost at sea during a mission to stop weapons shipments from Iran to Houthi terrorists. Less than 3 weeks later, January 28th, 3 American soldiers killed in Jordan by Iranian-backed militias. Then there is the disaster of Afghanistan. On August 26th, 2021, ISIS terrorists killed 13 brave American service members. They were the first American military casualties in Afghanistan in a year and a half. 20-year-old Lance Corporal Riley McCollum of Jackson Hole, Wyoming, was one of them. This was a young man who loved his country and left an impression on everyone he met. He was our home state wrestling champion. He had recently been married. He was about to become a father. 1,300 people in Wyoming showed up to attend his funeral. It was outdoors at a tent, 37 degrees, lasted several hours, and no one left. Because Americans deserve better than a president who forgets the sacrifices of American heroes and forgives the aggression of Americans' adversaries. But Joe Biden's weakness and confusion are a vivid contrast to what past presidents have done. I think of President Ronald Reagan and his successful policy of peace through strength. For 8 years, President Reagan built a strong national defense. He restored America's confidence. He confronted Americans' enemies. His approach incredibly ended the Cold War without firing a single shot. 3 decades later, President Trump adopted a similar policy. No more apologizing for America like President Obama had done. We had strong borders. We had a strong military, we had a strong economy, and we had strong American leadership. Our allies respected us, our enemies feared us, we were safer. It's time for America to return to that approach. The truth is that Joe Biden is a president who cannot defend his record and cannot defend this nation. For the safety of our nation, we need a lot less of Joe Biden's weakness and a lot more peace through strength. That's what we need to do. That's the way we get America back on track. Thank you, Madam President, and I yield the floor. Madam President, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, just delivered a historic speech to Congress. This is the 4th time the Prime Minister has spoken to the United States Congress, more than the late Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Winston Churchill. Like Prime Minister Churchill, Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke of a battle between freedom and evil. He shared with us welcome news, and that news is that freedom is winning. Israel's committed to bringing home the hostages, to protecting its citizens from the atrocities that occurred on October 7th attack. Meanwhile, the Hamas terrorist network is under more pressure than ever. Half of its senior leadership is dead. Its military chief has likely been eliminated. Remember, Hamas is a terrorist group. It governs through fear and through violence. Hamas violently rejects the right of Israel to exist and the right of the Jewish people to live in Israel. Hamas hides behind civilians. It uses them as human shields. Hamas stores its weapons, its military weapons designed to kill, in hospitals, in schools, and in homes. It has stolen billions of dollars of humanitarian aid to build its terrorist tunnel all around the area of the Gaza Strip. This is the same tunnel network where for 9 months and counting, 116 hostages, including 8 American hostages, being held by Hamas terrorists. I stand firmly with Israel as Israel fights to finish the war and defeat Hamas. Sadly, supporting Israel has grown more divisive in this country than I've ever seen it before. Today, Democrats are abandoning our greatest ally in the Middle East. They're calling to put conditions on aid to Israel. The Biden-Harris administration has delayed the delivery of war-winning weapons. The Senate Democrat leader meddled in Israel politics. He proclaimed in no uncertain terms on the floor of this very body that Prime Minister Netanyahu should step down. The senior senator from Vermont went even further. Last month, he declared that Prime Minister Netanyahu is a war criminal. Madam President, that accusation is disturbing, it's damaging, and it's dishonest. If it weren't bad enough, Vice President Harris skipped the Prime Minister's speech entirely. The Vice President typically presides over joint sessions of Congress. With her snub to Israel, Vice President Harris is leading the Democrats' Bibi boycott. Catering to the pro-Hamas wing of the Democrat Party is not serious leadership, not at all. The Vice President now wants to be Commander-in-Chief of the United States of America, yet she refuses to put politics aside and work with our indispensable ally. Her actions send a defeatist message to our enemies and a defeatist message to our allies alike. Madam President, this is a time when it is so critical for us to restore confidence in America. Here's what we need to do and how to do it. You do it through peace through strength, with strong, steady, and serious support for Israel and for Israel's right to exist. What is the approach of President Biden today? What is the approach of Vice President Harris? And what is the approach of the Senate Democrats, members of this body? Is it continued to appease our adversaries and at the same time abandon our friends? This is a dangerous world, Madam President. It is more dangerous under the failed policies of the Biden-Harris administration. America cannot continue down Democrats' path of war and weakness. Keeping America safe requires America and Israel working together. We heard that today in the joint session of Congress. Republicans believe in Israel's mission to defeat Hamas. We understand fully what is at stake, and our support is firm. Madam President, we must unite and bring back peace through strength. Now more than ever, the American people need to stand with Israel, and I'm one of those people that will continue to stand with Israel. Thank you, Madam President, and I yield the floor.
Senator from Nebraska.
I ask 753, the Energy Permitting Reform Act of 2024. This is a bipartisan bill that Chairman Manchin and I have negotiated with input from members of this committee over the last year. The bill is a targeted set of consequential reforms within the committee's jurisdiction. It's going to boost American energy and mineral production. It will help lower costs for American families. It will strengthen our economic and national security and the security of our allies around the world. Our bill will guarantee future access to oil and natural gas resources on federal lands and waters. It will permanently end President Biden's reckless ban on new liquefied natural gas exports. It will fix the disastrous Rosemont decision by the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, and it will ensure that new transmission lines meaningfully improve electric reliability and actually benefit customers. Our bill includes a series of reforms for onshore oil and gas leasing and permitting. For example, it requires the Secretary of Interior to lease acreage that oil and gas producers actually want. It also eliminates duplicative requirements for federal drilling permits on state and private land. Even a new administration will not be able to enact these reforms under current law. Our bill also mandates at least one oil and gas lease sale in the Gulf of Mexico each year from 2025 through 2029. That's 5 total lease sales. Each sale offers at least 60 million acres. Under existing law, a new administration would only be able to hold 2 lease sales in the next 4 years. Our bill permanently ends President Biden's so-called pause on new American LNG exports. President Biden's pause has been a gift to Russia and Qatar, the world's other leading LNG exports. Our bill requires the Secretary of Energy to act on LNG export applications within 90 days. If the Secretary fails to act, the application would be deemed approved. Our bill also secures access to critical minerals on federal lands. It fixes the Rosemont decision by authorizing mill sites on federal land, whether or not that land has minerals. It eliminates a legal strategy that opponents have pursued for nearly 30 years to block access to minerals on federal lands. Even a new administration would not be able to fix the Rosemont decision under current law. Our electric transmission, I followed 3 principles. First, any changes to existing law must improve electric reliability. Second, any changes must not result in more subsidies. And third, any changes must improve the status quo for states, for electric customers, and for landowners. And I believe our bill fulfills these principles. Our bill eliminates the Secretary of Energy's authority to designate national interest electric transmission corridors. The Secretary's process has become far too political. It is something that Senator Hawley has rightly opposed. In its place, the bill requires a transmission developer to show that the FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, in its proposed line meaningfully improves electric reliability. Under current law, the Commission already has broad authority to allocate the costs of new transmission lines. Our bill prohibits the Commission from allocating costs to customers who receive little to no benefit from a new line. It also requires the Commission to consider a specified list of customer benefits that can be quantified and objectively measured. Our bill puts guardrails on the Commission's next rulemaking. FERC staff has already begun developing a rule on interregional transmission planning. Our bill protects the discretion of the 11 existing transmission planning regions. Our bill makes it more likely that neighboring regions will only support lines necessary to improve electric reliability. I want to thank the Chairman and his entire staff for their patience and their perseverance. We would not be here today without their efforts. Our negotiations were not easy. Many points along the way, at many points, it was far from clear that we would ever reach an agreement. And even now, I know members want to do more, especially on hydropower, and you have my commitment that we will keep working on it. Despite the expectations of many, we have put together what I believe is a very strong piece of legislation before us, and for that reason, I encourage all members of the committee to support it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Now that we do have a quorum, and we're going to vote on the nomination to be Deputy Secretary of Interior and Shannon Estenos. The question is on the favorability of reporting the nomination of Shannon to be Deputy Secretary of the Interior. The recommendation that the nomination be confirmed. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Manchin.
Aye.
Mr. Wyden.
Aye.
Ms. Cantwell.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Sanders.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Heinrich.
Aye.
Ms. Hirono. Mr. King. Ms. Cortez Masto. Mr. Hickenlooper. Mr. Padilla. Mr. Barrasso.
Aye.
Mr. Risch.
Aye.
Mr. Lee.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Daines. Ms. Murkowski. Mr. Hoban.
No. I'm going to correct first. Lee is, you said no. Okay. Did I read it wrong? Okay. Lee is no by proxy. Do we have anything on Hoban?
And Mr. Hoban.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cassidy.
Aye by proxy.
Mrs. Hyde-Smith. Mr. Hawley. On this vote, the ayes are 16 and the noes are 3.
With that, she is accepted and been confirmed.
Mr. Chairman, I ask that my statement on her be admitted to the record.
Absolutely. The objection?
Mr. Chairman, I would just like to note for the record that my no vote on Ms. Estenoz is not reflective of the woman that I had an opportunity to meet with in my office. It is absolutely reflective on the fact that I don't believe that under this administration, we're going to see any better policies out of the Department of Interior when it comes to the state of Alaska. And so I can't support her this morning.
Duly noted.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Daines?
So I voted yes. I said my statement, if I could submit it for the record, please.
Absolutely. Without objection? We're going to turn to the Senate Bill 4753, the Energy Permitting Reform Act. Before I do so, I think there's some opening statements people would like to make. If you keep it 2 minutes, it'd be very, very appreciative. We can get to the bill. Senator White.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman and colleagues, we made history in 2022 with respect to energy.
The Democrats have successfully benched their starting quarterback, Joe Biden, and replaced him with someone equally incompetent but much more liberal to call the plays. As Vice President, Kamala Harris has been leading the cheers for the party of high prices and open borders. As Vice President, she broke the tie 17 times on radical nominees, some who want to defund the police. She broke the tie to pass the reckless tax and spending bill, which brought us the highest inflation in 40 years. And as the borders are, she opened the floodgates. 10 million illegal immigrants invaded our country. When they ranked senators, she was ranked the most liberal United States senator when she was a senator. Dangerously liberal, a San Francisco liberal, more liberal than Bernie Sanders. How liberal is that? Well, it's somebody that proposed eliminating private health insurance for Americans, but yet she wants to pay for health care for illegal immigrants. In the Senate, she co-sponsored the Green New Deal, and she proposed eliminating fracking, which would drive energy prices even higher. She helped raise money for bail for criminals in our jails. And at the same time, she's made it easier for illegal immigrants to stay here when they are criminals. The damage that she has done is cumulative. Prices are up 20% since she came into office. 10 million illegal immigrants. That's why 3 out of 4 Americans say the country is headed in the wrong direction. A vote for Democrats and Kamala Harris is a vote for more inflation, higher prices, and an open border. Republicans know what to do. It's stop the wasteful Washington spending, it's secure the border, it's unleash American energy. That's the way to get America back on track.
From Wyoming.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, last week, President Biden gave what many consider his farewell address. Americans are eager to say farewell and in many ways good riddance to Joe Biden and the policies that he has brought along with the Democrats upon our country. It's been a record of ruin. When Americans look at the state of our nation today, they don't like what they see. 3 out of 4 Americans will tell you that the country is heading in the wrong direction. Prices are 20% higher than they were when Joe Biden and Kamala Harris came into office. People are forced to cut back, forced to decide whether they can fill their gas tanks or their grocery carts. According to CNN, nearly 40% of all Americans say they worry that they can't pay their bills. So how did we get here? Well, Democrats passed trillions of dollars in reckless and radical and runaway spending. It was so unpopular as a proposal, and Congress heard from the American people how unpopular it was. It was so unpopular that at a point it was tied, the vote, and then they had to bring in someone to break the tie. Who was that person who cast that tie-breaking vote that brought us 40-year high inflation, the highest prices in 40 years, for which so many people suffer today? That person was Vice President Kamala Harris. That's right, Vice President Harris, who is now the nominee of the Democrat Party running for president. She is the one that came into this chamber to cast the vote to break the tie that fueled the highest prices that we continue to experience today. We also have a very long national nightmare occurring at our southern border. That is yet another result of the dangerously liberal agenda of Vice President Harris. We had a secure border 4 years ago. Then Joe Biden and Kamala Harris came into the White House. Biden and Harris canceled the border wall. Biden and Harris canceled Remain in Mexico. They replaced detain and deport with catch and release. President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris provided over an invasion of our southern border by 10 million illegal immigrants. Since the time that Vice President Harris was appointed as border czar, millions and millions of illegal immigrants have come into the country. Millions and millions of more known gotaways, hiding from authorities, have gotten into this country. A total we're looking at 10 million illegal immigrants now in our communities. Many communities across this country are overrun and overwhelmed. Yet Joe Biden and Kamala Harris don't seem to care. They don't seem to care about the drugs and the death and the destruction that are harming American families from coast to coast. Vice President Harris has a view of border security that to me is particularly twisted and tortured. Here is her view, as she stated it. Basically, if you're an illegal immigrant, you're not a criminal, according to Kamala Harris. But if you are an agent of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, in her words, you are comparable to the Ku Klux Klan. That's from the Vice President of the United States. She also believes this. If you're an illegal immigrant, you're entitled to free health care. If you're an American citizen, she proposes that you would actually lose your ability to choose your health care, and that private health care in this country would be eliminated. No private health care for American citizens who would then be forced to pay for health care for illegal immigrants. That is the view of the Vice President of the United States and now the candidate for president by the Democrat Party. It is ignorant, it is insulting, and it is out of touch. If her views are America's policy, millions and millions more illegal immigrants will continue to flood across our southern border. It's a magnet drawing people in. It wasn't that way 4 years ago under the Trump administration. Back then, paychecks rose, prices were in check, and poverty fell at record rates. America was energy independent. Gas prices were affordable. Our border was safe and was secure. None of that is true today. Not under this administration or these policies of the Biden-Harris administration. Democrats and this administration at this time in our country will always be known as the party of high prices and open borders. Most Americans believe that our country is on the wrong track. And I believe most Americans are right. We are on the wrong track. There's good news, and that's that America can get back on track. We can get back on track with common sense policies, policies that work, policies the American people are asking for. Senate Republicans have solutions to the most pressing problems that are facing the American public today. First, we're going to address the number one issue facing Americans. Americans will tell you what their number one issue that they're concerned about, and that's the economy, the cost of things. We're going to make life more affordable for all families, and that starts with making us energy dominant again and lowering the cost of energy. Republicans will put a stop to Democrats punishing political regulations that are just coming at us like a tidal wave since the day this administration began. We will end America's dependence on communist China. We will strengthen American manufacturing, and we will put American workers and businesses first. Republicans also have solutions that will make our communities safer. Republicans will secure the border. We will finish the wall. Republicans will restore a program that worked called Remain in Mexico. This will stop the flood of illegal immigrants and the flow of deadly drugs. Mr. President, Republicans support our police officers, and we stand against the deadly defund the police movement. The very movement that Kamala Harris and Democrats proudly support. Kamala Harris actually came into this chamber to break the tie for radical nominees by this administration, a number of whom support defunding the police. That's the stand and that's the policy of the Biden-Harris administration. Abroad, Republicans will restore America's commitment to peace through strength. Here in the Senate, Republicans will protect our institutions and protect the rule of law. We firmly reject Democrats' plans to pack the court and rig the elections. These are solutions that unite Americans. Joe Biden is leaving behind a catastrophic record of ruin. We cannot afford 4 more years of these policies. Yet what we see is Vice President Harris and Democrats want to nationalize and the dangerously liberal policies of San Francisco Democrats. And that's what she is, a very liberal, dangerous San Francisco Democrat. That's her history. It's how her voting record had been in the United States Senate. Voted the most liberal member of the United States Senate, more liberal, Mr. President, than Bernie Sanders, the most liberal of 100 United States senators. And what we see is that as vice president and now presidential nominee, she wants to bring the California nightmare of high price, high taxes, high crime, and no accountability to every household in America. These policies would crush the middle class. What do Americans want? Lower prices and secure borders. What are the Democrats? The party of high prices and open borders. Senate Republicans will lower Democrats' wallet-wrecking high prices. Senate Republicans will work to secure our wide-open border and will work to keep Americans safe at home as well as abroad. There is no question, Mr. President, that Republicans are committed to get America back on track. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Kamala Harris is a dangerous San Francisco liberal. She has flip-flopped on one position after another as she's run for president because she's trying to run away from her radical record. On the one so-called interview that she did, she said, well, that didn't really matter because she said her values hadn't changed. Well, her values call for defunding the police, but coddling the criminals. Her values call for banning certain American energy products, making energy prices go up. Her values call for eliminating private health insurance in America, but giving free health care to illegal immigrants, as well as free housing, as well as debit cards loaded with taxpayer cash. Under Kamala Harris, the crime and the chaos that we see in San Francisco, that would be the face of America. So tonight they're having a debate, and she's going to use phrases like on day one and laser focused. Well, her day one was almost 4 years ago. And when she and Joe Biden and the Democrats focus their laser, they've caused massive misery for American families. Prices are up across the board over 20%, 10 million illegal immigrants into this country, people from criminal cartels, drug dealers, people on the terrorist watch list. Kamala Harris proclaimed that Bidenomics is working. And she proclaimed that the border wall, she said it was a stupid waste of money. 2 out of 3 Americans say this country is heading in the wrong direction. And in order to try to get elected
president, Kamala Harris, is flipping more of her positions than IHOP flips pancakes. Well, the thing about IHOP is they only flip once. She's going to flip just right back again after the election, no matter how it turns out, because, as she said, her values haven't changed. Mr. President, I come to the floor today to discuss the need to get our nation and our economy back on track. We learned this morning the new numbers have come out on inflation. Prices are higher today than they were the day that the Biden-Harris administration took over by over 20%. I hear about it in Wyoming every weekend, heard about it this past weekend, how high prices have become and the crushing effect that that's had on families in my state in Wyoming and all around the country. This has been going on now for over 3 years. Prices have continued to go up. And this crisis of high prices has been cumulative. The impact on families, cumulative. And it is regrettably causing very hard choices for families to make. It shouldn't be this way. Here's a recent headline from CBS News. It said, more Americans are having to choose between food and energy bills. Clearly, this is a reflection on the Biden-Harris administration. Now, one of those folks that talked about that, and the quote is from Stacey Friedman. Ms. Friedman says her energy bills each month cost her hundreds of dollars. As she told CBS News, sometimes I have to choose, she says, whether I'm going to pay the light bill or pay all the rent or buy food or not let my son participate in a sport. That's what's happened under the Biden-Harris administration. The impact of the high prices caused by the massive amounts of government spending passed without a single Republican vote that stimulated an amount of increase in prices, the highest in 40 years. Ms. Friedman's story is sadly all too common. Many Americans are feeling the high cost and the high anxiety related to the high cost of goods and services in their lives. Nearly 4 out of 10, 2 out of 5 Americans say they worry about their ability to pay their own bills. Since 2019, utilities cost the average American almost $300 more each month. Not $300 a month, $300 more each month than what they were paying before. These are the costly and cumulative consequences of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's war on affordable and reliable American energy. Mr. President, you ask people anywhere around the country, they know that this is an administration who has strongly come out against American energy. They froze federal oil and gas leases. They discouraged new energy production. They issued regulations to ban gas-powered vehicles, the kind of vehicles most Americans drive. So it's not a surprise that high energy prices continue to bother and cause pain for American families. Month after month, year after year, Americans watch their costs go up and regrettably see their savings, if they have savings, go down. The Biden-Harris administration has offered no solutions to our nation's cost of living crisis. Democrats instead tell the American people, don't believe the price tags at the grocery stores or the price at the gas pump. They want you to believe everything is okay. Americans know that isn't so. You know, we learned last month that the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is supposed to keep accurate unemployment data, well, they reported faulty numbers. 1 million jobs touted by the Biden-Harris administration do not actually exist. They never existed. They never were created. Yet the Biden-Harris administration claimed credit for jobs that do not exist. Meanwhile, we've had 2 straight months where job growth was lower than expected. America today has fewer manufacturing jobs than we did last year. In Michigan, auto workers are getting laid off. Last month, the car maker Stellantis announced plans to lay off more than 2,000 American workers from its plants in Detroit. This is the same car maker that received hundreds of millions of dollars in subsidies, a tidal wave of electric vehicle grants from the Biden-Harris administration. And they're laying off people. Take the money from the government, from the Biden administration, from the Harris administration, and lay off workers. It's no surprise that last night in the debate, Kamala Harris couldn't even answer the first question when they're asked, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? Are the American people better off now than they were 4 years ago? She could not defend herself, could not say yes, because people are not better off now than they were 4 years ago. These recent layoffs, they come as they switch their assembly lines from gas-powered vehicles to electric vehicles. Thousands of American workers soon be put in the unemployment line as a result of what Harris and Biden and the Democrats are continuing to promote. Democrat regulations, Democrat rhetoric, a rhetoric of impending climate doom are crushing American jobs. It's no wonder that Biden and Harris are now running from their record, and it is a record of ruin for the economy. Their flip-flops, the walkbacks, the cover-ups, all too apparent. The American people know that the policies of Vice President Harris has had a chilling impact on our American economy. When then Senator Harris was rated the most liberal member of the United States Senate, Americans listened. When Vice President Harris said recently that her values had not changed, people listened again. Americans are struggling, and Biden-Harris policies and the Democrat policies are to blame. Remember how we got here. The Democrats passed trillions of dollars in reckless, radical, runaway spending. It was so unpopular, not a single Republican voted for it. It had to pass with a tie-breaking vote. Who broke the vote? Well, the Vice President of the United States comes to the Senate to cast the tie-breaking vote, and that would be Kamala Harris, now the candidate of the Democrats for President of the United States. Vice President Harris came to this chamber, sat in that chair, and cast the vote that broke the tie, that brought us record high inflation, 40-year high inflation. Americans cannot afford 4 more years of failure. Americans need a break from the damaging policies of Vice President Harris. What Harris is proposing is more wasteful Washington spending. Harris wants to raise taxes on the middle class, impose socialist-style price controls. She supports banning fracking. She supports banning gas-powered vehicles. She wants to make energy more expensive. That's how she's voted. That's what her rhetoric has been. And as she said, her values haven't changed. Vice President Harris would continue the nightmare of high prices and high taxes. Let's remember, it was different 3.5 years ago under the Trump administration. Back then, paychecks were going up, inflation was non-existent, Americans were breaking free of poverty, Americans were energy dominant. Our southern border was safe and secure. Not anymore. People want to go back to those days of American prosperity again. So it is time to turn the page from the disastrous policies of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Republicans will work to lower prices, to unleash American energy, and to get this nation back on track. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Kamala Harris is doing everything she can to run and hide for her terrible position on the border. Why? Well, because she understands that the American people completely reject the Biden-Harris open border policies. She wants people to forget that she's the one that orchestrated and oversaw the disaster at our southern border. Her failures have been costly and deadly. Because of her failures, American citizens have been raped and murdered by illegal immigrants. Because of her failures, fentanyl continues to flow across the southern border. Now she pretends that she wants to secure the border. Nothing could be further from the truth. She's the one that started this stampede of illegal immigrants, those from criminal cartels, the drug dealers, the terror suspects. She stood and cheered when Joe Biden stopped building the wall that was already in the middle of being constructed. She stood in support when Joe Biden signed 94 executive orders throwing open the border. For 4 years, she's done everything she can to undermine our border laws. Now that 10 million illegal immigrants have come into the country, now that you've seen the videos of criminal gangs taking over apartment complexes and parts of cities, now that she came to the Senate floor and broke the tie to send American taxpayer dollar checks, stimulus checks to illegal immigrants, now all of a sudden she says she wants to get tough on the border. She doesn't. She's had 4 years to do it. She's refused. And if she's elected President of the United States, she will never secure the border. Kamala Harris and the Democrats have turned America into a gigantic magnet for illegal immigrants. They did it by giving free health care, free housing, free cell phones, free debit cards loaded with taxpayer cash. And now Democrats want to give illegal immigrants the right to vote. Communities all across this country are much more dangerous today than they were before Joe Biden and Kamala Harris came into this country as president and as vice president, because they have rolled out the red carpet for terror suspects, for criminal cartels, for drug dealers. 10 million illegal immigrants have come into the country. Kamala Harris, as vice president, has overseen as drug czar communities where Venezuelan gang lords have taken over apartment complexes, terrorized communities. That's why 3 out of 4 Americans say the country is headed in the wrong direction. Kamala Harris has been in office now for over 1,300 days. She is the presidential candidate of high prices and of an open border. Or as a friend of mine in Wyoming says, a wide open border, sky-high prices. People know they were better off when Donald Trump was president of the United States. Prices are 20% higher today than they were the day that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris came into office. Families are being crushed by these high prices. What does Kamala Harris want to do about it? She wants to raise taxes even higher. What does she want to do with the money? Give more things to more illegal immigrants. This is foolish, it's reckless, it's un-American. These liberal policies by the Democrats who are running for office, these are policies that are un-American. What we need to do is to make sure we put America first. And voters are going to have a chance to do that come November 5th.
Senator from Wyoming.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise today to discuss the crisis that we are facing today in America at our southern border. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have created the worst illegal immigrant crisis in American history. Kamala Harris and Joe Biden removed every successful policy that was in place during the Trump administration. Kamala Harris and Joe Biden replaced them with policies that released millions upon millions of illegal immigrants into our country. The crisis, the chaos, the crime, they're all a direct result of the terrible policies by Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. Here are the facts. More than 10 million illegal immigrants have flooded into our country. They've done that in just the last 4 years with Kamala Harris and Joe Biden in the White House. At the same time, deadly drugs like fentanyl flowing into our communities. Each year, tens of thousands of Americans are poisoned by fentanyl that comes across our southern border. Our communities in every state are being overrun and overwhelmed by this flood of illegal immigrants. Let's look at the horrible scenes that are developing now in Aurora, Colorado, just to the south of my home state of Wyoming. This is a city where members of violent Venezuelan gangs have turned apartment complexes into hellholes. That's exactly what they've done. One resident said it's been a nightmare. So how did these gangs find themselves in that situation, in that location? And how did the people living in those communities find themselves in this terrorizing situation? Well, according to one report, the Harris-Biden administration, along with the city of Denver, provided the incentives. What are the incentives? Well, Denver offered illegal immigrants 2 months of subsidized rent. The source of the rent money came from Democrats' March 2021 reckless tax and spending spree, $1.9 trillion. So stop and think about that for just a second. The same law that fueled 40-year high inflation, that caused prices to go up for families all across the country by 20% since Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have came into office. That same bill has now incentivized the worst border crisis in American history. It was Vice President Harris who came and sat in that chair and cast the critical tie-breaking vote right here in the Senate for that reckless spending bill. Her one single vote as Vice President, as President of this institution, the U.S. Senate, brought record high prices and a record-breaking border disaster. Look, these problems spill over from the sanctuary cities like those in Colorado, and they hit neighboring states like my home state of Wyoming. In Laramie County, Wyoming, law enforcement officials say that the number of illegal immigrants in their jails has more than doubled. One of those jailed illegal immigrants is a suspected member of that violent Venezuelan gang that took over the apartment complex in Colorado. A gang has been described as MS-13 on steroids. Make no mistake, Vice President Harris is complicit in all of this border disaster. Now, I think today, Vice President Harris says she wants to secure the border. New language for her. Well, let me tell you, hadn't done it yet. For the past 4 years, Kamala Harris has been the second most powerful person in the world. And she was appointed by the president to be the border czar. He said she knew how, he had full confidence in her, she knew how to handle the problem. Well, as the border czar, she has the power to secure the southern border and has that power still today. Not doing it. So let me ask again, why hasn't it been done? Let me tell you why, Mr. President. Like Joe Biden, Vice President Harris wants to smooth the flow of illegal immigrants. Doesn't want to stop it. Oh, no. Doesn't want to stop it, wants to smooth the flow. This is an extreme position and out of touch with the American people. Like Joe Biden, Kamala Harris opposes the border wall. She had actually called the wall a, quote, stupid waste of money. That's what we hear from the Vice President of the United States. That is an extreme position compared to what the American people would like to see happen today. Kamala Harris also said that building the wall to prevent terrorists from entering the country, she said, was the height of irresponsibility. The height of irresponsibility to try to keep terrorists out of the country. Nope, come on in, she wants. This, again, Kamala Harris, San Francisco liberal, extreme position. Remember, terror suspects are exploiting our vulnerability. The number of terror suspects that we've caught crossing the border has risen by 3,000% since Joe Biden and Kamala Harris took over the presidency and the vice presidency. This administration promises amnesty for illegal immigrants. This is an invitation. They're inviting millions upon millions of illegal immigrants into this country. This is an extreme position compared to what the American people want and expect from their elected officials. What we're seeing across the country is Kamala Harris, Democrats across the board, sanctuary city, providing free health care for illegal immigrants. Another extreme position of the Democrats in the White House. They demand that our hard-earned taxpayer dollars pay for free housing, free preloaded debt cards, free cell phones for illegal immigrants. The American public hate this. This is their taxpayer dollars. Democrats' open border policies have cost the taxpayers plenty. The numbers are jaw-dropping. $451 billion so far, and the number keeps going up. Like President Biden, Kamala Harris wants to stop deporting criminals who are here in this country illegally. She wants to stop it. In the past, she said illegal immigration should not be a crime. Well, once again, out of touch with the American people. It's an extreme position. This is the truth. Kamala Harris's policies are no different than the dangerous, disastrous, deadly policies of President Joe Biden, who signed 94 executive orders in his first 100 days in office. This is the problem that our country faces today. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris threw open the borders. 10 million illegal immigrants have come on through. When this administration stopped building the wall and ended Remain in Mexico, Vice President Harris was right there cheering on Joe Biden. When Joe Biden brought back the failed policy of catch and release, Vice President Harris had his back. When Joe Biden wanted to send stimulus checks to illegal immigrants, what happened? Kamala Harris came into this chamber, sat in that chair, and cast the tie-breaking vote for this radical and reckless policy, sending stimulus checks to illegal immigrants, just giving them more and more free stuff funded by the American taxpayers. To add insult to injury, Kamala Harris actually has said then, well, the border's secure. Nobody believes that. I don't even think she believes it. She should know better. If she does not, that should disqualify her from being a candidate for president or for being president. September 22, Vice President Harris claimed, we have a secure border. Who's she listening to? Why didn't she go and look for herself? 3 days earlier, the illegal immigrant who murdered Laken Riley entered our country. It is time to close the book on Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and their dangerous border policies. It's time for us to get serious, Mr. President, about securing the border and making our communities safer. Senate Republicans have real solutions. It's finish the wall. It's end catch and release. It's restore the Remain in Mexico policy, a policy that worked. Our solution also includes deporting illegal immigrants and stopping illegal immigrants from voting in our elections. So I return to the question I asked at the beginning. If Kamala Harris wants to secure the border, why hasn't she done so yet? Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.